You feel that, guys? I think the dark times are starting. If you were a gamer at all back in 2017, then you know the deal with this game. But let's go from the beginning. Battlefront II was meant to be more of a true Battlefront game than the one we got in 2015. It has a campaign, 3 areas of maps and gameplay, a decent selection of content at launch, especially compared to what was out before, and they added more stuff to the game as time went on. So what went wrong? To quote Video Game Donkey, they found a way to fuck it up. The loot boxes were so predatorily designed that it was shunned by not just Star Wars fans, but gamers at large. The game's already $60, but they made it pay to win in addition to that. It's like Black Ops 3, but exponentially worse. The amount of points you needed to unlock Darth Vader, or just a skin, was unrealistic. And so, they relied on people folding and spending more money just to have fun with the product they already bought. The reaction was so severe that the devs went back and fixed the game and the loot box system to not be bullshit. In fact, if you play the game now, it's really fun. Nowhere near perfect, it's missing a lot of essential characters and planets, though I will admit they do have some good Clone Wars content in the game. Certain Clone Trooper skins and all the prequel characters are voiced by those actors from the show, even if their physical appearance is that of the movies, which is a little jarring. But if that doesn't satisfy you, and you have a decent gaming PC, you can mod in characters and skins. I have never done this myself, but from what I see, the modded files replace those that are already in the game, most of the time. AKA, you can replace Rey with Ahsoka, or Obi-Wan with Kit Fisto, and so on and so forth. There is some creative fan-made content out there, and it's just a few clicks away. You can have Kylo Ren wear the neon vest from the SNL sketch, add in other characters like Din Djarin, Commander Cody, Darths Malgus, Revan, Bane, Tenebris, Plagueis, and Darth Jar Jar. And you can make everyone look like Legos. A Lego Battlefront II mod. All you have to do is incorporate zombies and Batman in some regard, and that's my entire YouTube channel in a nutshell. And because God stays in heaven out of fear of his creation, you can play as Belle Delphine. I don't know how to feel about that. But by the way, be careful with modding, because some of those mods can get you banned from the online multiplayer. Oh right, this game has a campaign. The story mode follows Iden Versio, an Inferno Squad, an elite stormtrooper unit that does all sorts of stealth missions for the Empire. Special forces, if you will. It starts with them during the Battle of Endor and their reactions to the second Death Star's destruction and the Empire's inevitable defeat. They go through character changes, and the main 2 characters become good guys after they realize that the Empire is, well, evil. No shit, right? But unfortunately for them, the third guy, Detective Lance from Arrow, by the way, is still loyal to the Empire, despite their new scorched earth policy. I had no idea that actor was British. Through the game, you play as Luke, Leia, Han, Lando, and you fly vehicles and do stuff. You visit a myriad of planets, including Naboo, Bespin, Takodana, and Sullust, I think. It's fun, albeit the story is a little lame. People really wanted to play as the bad guy for the entirety of the story, and have it be through Imperial or Sith eyes. I get that. I quite enjoy those stories myself, like the Darth Bane trilogy and Tarkin and etc., etc. It's very lore-heavy, like to a fault, I'd say. It very much connects to an earlier comic called Shattered Empire, and it shows Operation Cinder, basically the Empire's contingency if the Emperor is killed, which punishes certain Imperial planets for not keeping him alive, like Naboo and Fondor. The story ends at the Battle of Jakku, which is where they're saying the final battle of the Galactic Civil War was fought. I assume that the rest of the Empire became the Imperial Remnant, and did stuff on the side while they build up the First Order and clone old Sheev himself. The epilogue and DLC parts have the 2 good guy characters being hunted by the one who stayed bad. He's in the First Order now. I remember people saying that the 2 leads were going to be Rey's parents, which of course turned out not to be true, because that's stupid. But to be honest, I never finished that part of the story when the DLC came out. Maybe someday. It's just such a forgettable thing to do. I don't know. But overall, if this game is on sale, I would definitely give it a shot. It's miles better than where it started. It is a gorgeous looking game, and it works now, so that's good. Here we are, guys. The turning point. This is the movie that everyone has a strong opinion on. It's either you hate this movie and all the characters and decisions in it, or you defend them and Rian Johnson till the heat death of the universe. This movie brought out a lot of ugly in this fan base, so before I go into my thoughts on this movie, and it's not all good or all bad, I need to tell you guys, my viewers, this. I believe most of you, if not all of you, are rational people. In fact, I would say that most Star Wars fans are normal people, and they know the difference between valid criticism and harassment. Unfortunately, that small group of weirdos are loud, and people hear them and see them well. Now, I'm not going to preach to you guys, right? That's not what I want to do here. Like, I'm no saint. I have views that many would probably call problematic. I joke about messed up things, and what you see in my videos is but a taste of that. All true, so I'll just say this. These actors in these movies are just workers doing a job. Sure, they sell it more than what it is, but that's really it. Just workers doing a job. Most of the time, they're not writers or producers. Now, if you want to critique their acting, maybe it sucked in a role, that's all good. They'll probably help their performance. But harassing them on social media and being toxic is childish. I mean, you have to separate character from the actor. You have to separate art from the artist. You know what I mean? And it's not even separating art from the artist because they're just doing their job. They are not their characters. Like Daisy Ridley is not actually Rey. Kelly Marie Tran is not actually Rose Tico. And this isn't the first time this sort of thing has happened. In the aftermath of The Phantom Menace coming out, Jake Lloyd's life was pretty much ruined by all this toxicity. And the bullying to Ahmed Best was cruel. You have people harassing him on one side, ridiculing and bullying him for his performance of Jar Jar Binks. And then on the other side, you have people who are claiming that he was racist for playing that sort of character. And there are many more examples. And The Last Jedi wasn't the last time this happened. Moses Ingram faced this shit too for being Reva in the Obi-Wan Kenobi show. And it's not just these actors. I remember the YouTuber IHE got shot on because he liked this movie. Now, it is my opinion that social media made all this worse. Like everyone has been made so extreme. There's no more nuance anymore. You're either Jurassically one side or Jurassically another side. But hopefully things will get better. Who knows? I have hope. Star Wars is about hope. Now, I'm sorry to take so much time in the beginning for such a dumb topic, but I believe this is part of the retrospective. And I do believe all this stupid stuff is part of Disney's era of Star Wars. So I figure I might as well get all this out now, so it's all nice and done and over with. But never mind that, now for the important stuff, the actual review of the movie. The Last Jedi takes place just after The Force Awakens. A first for Star Wars. There are usually years between movies. The Resistance is on the run from the First Order, and are being tracked through hyperspace, and are running low on fuel. Poe gets in trouble with Leia when he goes against orders to take out a dreadnought, which results in many of his squadron dying. Finn is set out to get a slicer to aid the Resistance, and runs across Rose Tico, who turns his mission upside down. All the meanwhile, Rey gets a cynical Luke to teach her in the ways of the Force, while learning more about his relationship with his estranged nephew, Kylo Ren, who is also going through turmoil due to his failures in the last movie. Just by the way I described the plot, you can probably see the issue here. There are so many plot lines and arcs and fetch quests in this film, and they are all half-baked, which is especially bad because of how important some of these events are. And the tragic thing is, if only half of these stories were in the movie, they could really be well done, and this could be one of the best Star Wars movies ever. There are so many good moments and ideas that could work, but just don't in the end. I'll go through some of them. Start small. Leia uses the Force finally, in the most goofiest way, when she gets blown into space by her son, which also kills off one of the most beloved Glub Shidos, Admiral Akbar, off screen. Her and Poe's story about how being reckless and needlessly sacrificing people is bad could have been an amazing message, if not for, 1, the message is not well told, and 2, just in the last movie, it was all about people giving their lives for the greater good. Hell, Finn was about to do just that, but it stopped, which leads to God knows how many soldiers dying. Speaking of which, Finn's quest could have been cool, but Rose literally stops that in its tracks by a mere misunderstanding. I would argue that she is the worst character of all the sequels for how she derailed a big part of this movie. They would later learn of some of the moral gray areas of both the Resistance and the First Order, relating to arms dealers. But that's just a mention and then left alone. By the way, isn't it kind of weird how the conflict between the First Order and the Resistance never has a name? Luke being a recluse, or recluse, however you say that word, and his conflict with Ben Solo could have been great if done right. I know Luke is the end-all be-all hero, But I believe any story could be good if told right. This was not it. Having Luke give up on the Jedi and attacking Ben Solo makes no sense. Luke was about to nay-nay his own nephew, Ben, because he sensed darkness. That's not what Jedi do, regardless of the story. Yes, in the KOTOR comics, something similar happened there, but those Jedis were meant to be the antagonists. Ben joining the Knights of Ren and killing the Jedi should not have made Luke against the idea of the Jedi. What, because they got massacred a few times? Boo-hoo. There's no logic. I do agree that the Jedi being oversaturated in the Republic led to the rise of the Empire and the Sith. That's a good idea, but it doesn't do anything here. The more I think about Luke's story here, the less sense it makes. If the Knights of Ren were his students, then yes, I'd get Luke's reluctance. Hell, they could very well be. But that's not mentioned in the movie. I know there's a comic about the fall of Ben Solo, but no movie worth a damn should require supplemental material just to understand the plot. The prequels were guilty of this, and The Rise of Skywalker sure as hell is too. Kylo Ren killing Snoke in that fight after that was actually awesome, but that probably derailed the trilogy the most. Why kill Snoke just to have Kylo Ren be a different Snoke? Why wipe out the Resistance in this movie when it doesn't go anywhere? Like, think about it. The Resistance started off as a small fleet of people, and then, in the end, you could put all of them inside the Millennium Falcon, because so many of them were killed off. Why decimate them and treat the end like it's a big, happy, cheesy ending? Lastly, and this might be the biggest tragedy here, why does this film look so gorgeous when the writing is this mind-bogglingly mediocre? Like, this is the best looking, best shot, most beautiful looking Star Wars movie. Look how grand some of these shots are. The space battles look large. Holdo's sacrifice looks like a screensaver. And the final showdown between Ren and Luke, to steal from the great Doug Walker, looks like a grand anime of the highest compliment. My favorite shot of the whole movie, it's Leia on Crate, turning away from the light. Here's what I get from this image. Leia has been in the fight against tyranny and the Empire pretty much since birth. She's fought, she's lost friends and loved ones in the fight, lost her planet, finally wins and has a family, and leads a new republic, only for it all to be taken away. Her son goes to the dark side, her brother goes into exile, Han gets killed, and she has to fight the Empire all over again. Like, all the sacrifice in her life was for nothing. And now she's old and weak, and the light is right in her face. Like, how much fight does she truly have left in her? Now for the characters, and how most of them, if not all of them, are hurt by this movie. I already covered Luke. Poe is a dumbass in this one. He was so cool and badass in The Force Awakens, but he clearly disobeys orders from the High Command, gets many of his people killed, and then gets rightly demoted. When Leia gets injured, her friend Vice Admiral Holdo comes in to lead. To be perfectly honest, I don't mind Holdo, or at least not as much as other people do. Leia having allies like her makes perfect sense. I mean, she kind of reminds me of Winter from the Legends books. Now yes, she talks down to Poe condescendingly, and admittedly with disrespect. But she's his CO. Poe is what, a captain? That's her job, to lead him, and if need be, withhold information from him. She's not on the level as, like, Pong Krell, but I will concede she is a bad leader. And, to be fair, many believe that the character of Holdo was made just to cause discourse among fans. Which I definitely see. With her demeanor and coming out of the blue to boss around Poe can definitely come across as problematic. Her hair being dyed a vibrant color doesn't help matters. And what the hell is this Godspeed Rebels thing? The existence of a singular god in the universe of Star Wars makes absolutely no sense, and I will die on that hill. But back to Poe real quick. He leads a mutiny against Holdo, which could have been cool, but here's how the events play out. Does a mutiny, Leia comes back, stuns him, and then Holdo's like, I like him. So cheesy and does not flow with the tone, and it's also just not consistent with what was going on in the movie. Like, those events are so laughably disjointed, it's like the tone zigzags. But the moment of the mutiny is when I stopped caring about Poe's character arc. Rey sucks in this movie too. She just becomes boring. I find myself not really caring about her journey and her need to understand who she is. I feel she lacks that agency that she had in The Force Awakens. I don't know how else to describe that. But Finn, oh my god, what the fuck did they do to Finn, man? He was such a good lead in the first one. But here, he's just being led around by an unlikable character and pretty much has no arc in this. Sure, he learns how bad arms dealers are, but, like, no shit, right? The man was a stormtrooper, And when he tries to sacrifice his life to save the Resistance in the end, his conclusion is taken away by Rose, followed by a very, very stupid line. Finn should have been the lead of this trilogy, but nah, Disney had better plans. And his quest, like most things in this movie, goes nowhere. What did he leaving the fleet to get a slicer, who betrays him anyway, add substantially to the movie? What else can I say about The Last Jedi? Just this last bit. Now, this might be the stupidest comparison in the world, but here goes. The Last Jedi is the Batman v Superman of Star Wars films. Both had high as hell expectations. Both had the potential to be exceptional with the premise alone. Both have great moments in isolation from the movie. Both get some things done really well. Both are shot beautifully, yet both wanted to subvert expectations and try to do what they thought was better. Both try to be groundbreaking and reach for the stars, but pulled an Icarus instead. Both have some of the worst and stupidest moments and decisions in the fundamentals of the story. Lastly, and most importantly, both of these movies ruined their respective franchises. I can forgive this movie derailing the franchise. We have had shitty Star Wars movies before, whatever. But the worst thing about The Last Jedi is, it turned many of my friends against Star Wars, to the point where these guys are even embarrassed to have liked it in the first place. Considering that I got into Star Wars because of some of my friends, I cannot forgive this film for this. But at the end of the day, and while people now are more skeptical about the new things that are being made by Disney, no matter what, we still have the old movies and the books, and the shows, and all that stuff from before. They all still exist. They didn't turn to dust. They're not out of existence. We can still read and watch and consume them. The only exception is The Force Awakens, because now we know exactly where these characters are going. So it's kind of tainted now. But yeah, The Last Jedi, while having exceptional parts, is not a good film. Oh, and Captain Phasma's in it too. So at this point, The Last Jedi is out and has been making fans mad and divided. Before that, we had Battlefront II's god-awful launch. But now we have Solo, a Star Wars story, which is the origin of Han Solo. How he met Chewbacca and Lando, got the Falcon, and did the Kessel Run. There's some potential here, maybe not as much as in other projects, but some all the same. So maybe third try is the charm, right? It's not like the directors, Lord and Miller, were switched for Ron Howard last minute, right? Uh-oh. Solo takes place mostly 10 years before A New Hope. Han is part of a street gang on Corellia with his sweetheart, Kira, and in an attempt to leave, they get separated. With no other prospects, Han joins the Imperial Navy and finds himself in a battle where he meets Tobias Beckett and his crew. They attempt and fail a job together, to which they have to make up for, or else they are dead AF. From there, we have some twists and turns, adventures and heists, and some quirky friends along the way. So let me get the good out of the way first. Alden Ehrenreich, or however you say his name, does a pretty good job of playing a young, inexperienced Han Solo. He doesn't capture Harrison Ford like 100%, because, well, no one can. But I can believe that this is a younger and greener Han Solo. The rest of the cast was fine. I liked it when it's a group ensemble, with everyone bouncing off each other, with some decent action too. I like how they retconned the whole 12 parsec era within A New Hope. The battle on Mimban was cool, even though you couldn't really see what was going on. Oh, and there was a neat little reference to Terras Kasai, the hit PlayStation 1 game. And now for the bad. This movie feels like a waste. A waste of money, time, acting, work, writing, just everything. Waste of everything. What does this movie add to Han Solo's character? Or the universe even? What I mean is, watch the original Star Wars trilogy, and try to imagine what Han's life must have been with the dialogue alone. Then watch this movie and tell me if they added anything new to what you had already thought. His growing up on Corellia, him meeting Chewbacca and Lando, and him winning the Millennium Falcon from Lando, it's all how you would expect. Now, this movie does have new characters, but you won't remember them after the movie's over. The two most important are Tobias Beckett and Kira. Beckett becomes a mentor to Han throughout the picture, telling him not to trust anyone and taking him on heists. Kira is the love interest for Han. They grew up together, so there's an emotional connection with that. This could have been interesting. If I wrote this movie, I would have her be the big twist villain, and really break Han's heart, making him the colder man that we see in A New Hope, who shoots first. I mean, she sort of does in the end, but it doesn't really affect Han enough, because it's after the climax, and the big reveal of who she was really working for kind of takes away that impact, which I'll get into that nonsense in a second. A redeeming thing about Kira is that she's played by Emilia Clarke, and she's badder than a motherfucker. God damn! But instead, Beckett is the one that betrays Han. But Han would expect it and foil his plan with the coaxium. It was the climax of the movie where I tapped out. It just felt like a mediocre nothing movie. Let's go back to the beginning, shall we? When Han's on Corellia, which, by the way, there's an opening crawl, and it might be the most unnecessary crawl in the entire franchise. Maybe because they felt insecure that Rogue One didn't have one, so they jammed it in. But when the movie starts, the first couple of scenes are so dark you legit cannot see what's going on. And I'm not saying that low visibility in a movie is bad by default, if it's intentional, but you deadass cannot make out the actions of the characters. When the prologue ends, Han joins the Imperial Academy, which is what he does in Legends, so that's all fine and good. It's when he's joining that when this movie's stupidest moment occurs. He gets his last name Solo from the Imperial officer because he has no people. Bruh, what was this thing? Why can't Solo just be his last name by default? Whose decision was this? Like, Jesus Christ. Later on, when we meet Lando, we also meet his droid, L337. Now, in this retrospective, I have already made a lot of hyperbole, and while that's not good, and I do apologize, trust me when I say that this is my most hated character in all of Star Wars. Legends, canon, everything. I hate this droid. And I hate to use this word in this cliche, but let's be honest, she is the SJW droid. Everything I hate about Twitter encapsulated in this robot. And while the causes she fights for, droid liberation, are noble, how she goes about it is so obnoxious, and just like with all those other Twitter freaks, they do damage to their otherwise just cause. The way she treats Lando like shit and his love for the droid is so bizarre to me. L3's voice is the icing on the shit cake. It's Phoebe Waller-Bridge as the voice of L3. Now, I feel bad for this talented actress. I fear she's being typecasted, as every well-known character she plays is a bitch. At least in Fleabag, her character is charming and it's supposed to be endearing. I haven't seen Dial of Destiny yet, but I know she's in it, and I am scared. Alright, let's talk about the big twist of who Kira was working for. At the end of the movie, it's revealed that she was working for Maul in his Shadow Syndicate. Now, let's pretend I did not watch Clone Wars. You did not watch Clone Wars. We've only seen the movies. Alright, let's see. Maul was in Episode 1, he was in The Phantom Menace, and he gets cut in half, and to my knowledge, he got killed. I have no idea that he survived. I had no idea that he would become a menacing threat and form a crime syndicate. And I had no idea that he would be killed for real a few years before New Hope in Rebels. So why would they bring this character back in this way? It just doesn't make any sense. Like, the casual fan, they see this, they're like, alright, so something happened without me watching, and I feel a disconnect. And just like what I said about Last Jedi, no movie worth its salt should require external knowledge from other sources. Like, keep the story in the movie. Like, people don't need to be watching a whole 6-season TV show just to understand the motivation of a character in a movie. That's all I'm saying. All in all, what can be said about Solo? I personally consider The Last Jedi a better film. At least it tried to do something different in its failure. The movie did some damage to the plans Disney had with Star Wars. They had plans for an Obi-Wan Kenobi and Boba Fett films, solo films. So they got scrapped and replaced by stretched out, lackluster bullshit Disney Plus shows. As of right now, this is the second to last Star Wars film made by Disney. But if Solo had been better, maybe they kept Lord and Miller on. It would have been obvious to conclude that its success would maintain Disney's financial plans for these projects. But due to its failure, they pivoted, like any business would and should. So yeah, I think this movie blows. But hey, it's all uphill from here, right? Right? Only time will tell, but for now, I will move on to something completely different, as I leave you all in anticipation. All 5 seconds worth. Yes, sir, it's time to talk about Galaxy's Edge, a section in the Disney theme parks that is dedicated to Black Spire Outpost from the planet Batuu. Since I've only been to the Florida location, that is all I will talk about, and not the one in California. So, Black Spire Outpost, aka Star Wars Galaxy's Edge, is located in Disney's Hollywood Studios, right next to Toy Story Land in a 3D Muppets show. Construction started in April of 2016 and was opened on August 29, 2019. It's supposed to be the spaceport far away in the Outer Rim, where all sorts of travelers travel to on their travels. The park itself takes place in the sequel era, as the First Order and the Resistance both occupy the place. It has since appeared in a surprisingly small amount of books and comics. Galaxy's Edge replicates the gritty and industrial look that Disney Star Wars has. Quite well, I'd say. As for now, there are 2 rides. Smuggler's Run is the ride in which you and 5 other people fly the Millennium Falcon to Corellia for Hondo Anaka in order to get coaxium for the Resistance. If we are to take the lore in this amusement ride at face value, Hondo would be very old at this time. But it is cool to get to see a live-action version of him, even if it's just an animatronic. And the ride itself is quite fun. You can either be a gunner, an engineer, or a pilot. Being the pilot is a lot more fun because you get to pull the handle to go to hyperspace. It also helps to go on this ride after visiting the cantina, if you know what I mean. Rise of the Resistance is something else entirely. The story is that you're part of the Resistance, but get captured by the First Order in their Star Destroyer. That part, when the doors open and you're in the hangar, is something that you'll never forget. It really is impressive. You are then escorted to a holding cell and are broken out by the Resistance, and go on this trackless car ride, and you go all throughout the destroyer until you escape. I won't spoil the ride further, you just need to experience it for yourself. However, if you're like me, you don't like drops in a ride. And there is one at the end of this one, but it's quick, it's painless, don't worry about it. There are other experiences at Black Spire. There's Oga's Cantina, where they serve fun drinks with fun names. I got the Fuzzy Tauntaun there, which is basically a fuzzy navel, but with this numbing foam that tickles your lips. There's music played by a droid DJ, and the bartenders and servers really get into it. Maybe a little too much. I don't know, I like immersion as much as the next guy, but there comes a point where it just becomes a mix of cringy and creepy. You can also go to Doc Ondar's and buy some merch. That store is an amusement in itself, as the wall is all decorated in various Star Wars props and Easter eggs, from movies to shows and animated stuff. You can buy lightsabers of certain characters, from Anakin to Rey to Cal Kestis to Ahsoka, and even pay for an experience in which you build your own lightsaber. My fiance and I were lucky enough to do that before the prices went up. She made a natural-looking hilt with a green blade, and I made more of a Sith-looking one with a purple blade. There are other minor things around the park, like blue milk stands and the occasional character walking around. However, I find this place to be lacking. All that money and time spent for the park only to have 2 rides. Only one of them was at opening day, mind you. I think by theming it around the sequel trilogy, Disney limited themselves to what they could do, regardless if you're a fan of the sequel trilogy or not. I'm sure the market research on what the majority of Star Wars fans prefer would be interesting. I'd love to see that. Luckily, Disney is starting to expand on the theming of the park. As of now, especially in the California location, there are characters walking around from earlier in the timeline, like Din Djarin and Grogu, Boba Fett, Fennec Shand, and now with the Ahsoka show out, Ahsoka and Hera Syndulla. I view Black Spire Outpost like I view Disney World. One should visit there at least once in their life, but repeated visits will make the place feel barren and boring. Oh god, another Star Wars game made by EA. Whatever will happen. Just kidding, this game is great. Finally, something that's actually good. We haven't had that in a few projects. Jedi Fallen Order is a Souls-like video game, where you play as Order 66 survivor Cal Kestis, who was outed as a Jedi after 5 years of hiding on the planet Bracca. But luckily, he joins the crew of the Mantis, one of whom is former Jedi Master Seer Junda, and the other is Little Grease Tritus, the pilot. Their quest is to find a holocron made by Seer's former master Eno Cordova that has all the names of the future Jedi on it and use it to rebuild the Jedi Order. On their adventures, they visit the planets Zepho, Kashyyyk, Dathomir, and Bogano. Each planet feels like it's a real place, with the intimate level of detail on the worlds. Something I have to give Disney credit for is that their planets all feel gritty and lived in and dirty. It just sucks that they only know how to make 3 planet types. But back to our heroes. They are being harassed by the Inquisitors from the Rebels show, one of whom is Cere's former Padawan, Trilla, and she's kind of bad. And on their later trip to Dathomir, they are joined by Merrin, the last of the Night Sisters, or one of the last Night Sisters, and she is one of the baddest women in all of Star Wars. Praise be to Ashla and Bogan. God, that was bad. Oh, and we also get a bit of Cal's master, Jaro Tapal, in another Order 66 scene to add to our collection. Like I said, the gameplay is similar to a Souls game, very melee-driven, lots of exploration and unlocking new areas to go, if not quite easier to beat. I actually tried out some Souls games for the first time recently, so pardon me if what I'm about to say sounds very ignorant. In fact, is that even the right term for those games? Souls games? I know the games have similar gameplay. Is it the same company and story? I digress. But I know the gist of Demon Souls and Elden Ring is, if I'm following this correctly, an evil force has taken over a realm, and you are the only hope of defeating that evil. One against an army. What an interesting take on Star Wars that can be. Any surviving Jedi in the galaxy at this time are in those shoes. One against all. And because Cal's training wasn't finished, you get to unlock more powers and abilities as time goes on. The framing of this game is so clever to my monkey brain. I also like to compare this game to Jedi Academy and look at the differences. In one game, the Jedi are all but extinct against an empire at its height. In the other game, the Jedi are making a comeback against the Imperial Remnant. Different framing devices, different types of abilities. The only thing is, I wish that this game and all games with lightsabers had dismemberment. That and the ability to have a red saber or use dark side abilities. Those might be in Survivor. I don't know. But I hope the next one is rated M in case they make new skins for Merrin, if you know what I mean. In fact, they gotta make a Honey Pop-esque game for Star Wars. That would have such huge potential, I think. I don't have much to say about the game because it's just good, and I don't want to spoil too much so you can go and play it. I did hear that on PS4 and Xbox One, it's glitchy as a motherfucker, so your mileage may vary. What else? I like the Clone Wars references between Saw Gerrera on Kashyyyk, Dathomir and Merrin's backstory, and the clones in the flashback, and a bunch of other Easter eggs. And that's not to say the new stuff isn't cool. This game makes a world of lore for their new species, the Zepho. All in all, it's a fun piece of Star Wars, and after a few mediocre projects, this seems like a breath of fresh air. Okay, here we are, the first major Disney Plus show that people give a shit about, and the first live-action Star Wars show this side of the holiday special, The Mandalorian. What a weird world we live in. When I started getting into Star Wars, I knew the Mandalorians to be this weirdo warrior culture that Boba Fett and the Republic Commandos were a part of. Relatively obscure. And now, the word Mandalorian is a household name, or household word. Crazy. I would get into a synopsis of The Mandalorian Season 1, but you all know the setup. A Mandalorian who is a bounty hunter goes on adventures and fights the Imperial Remnant sometimes, all with his trusty sidekick, Baby Yoda. It's interesting rewatching the show, thinking how genius it was, marketing-wise, to make this little bastard. Now I realize that Grogu would be the bane of the show, but I'll save that for later. Before I get into my opinion of the show, I have a blanket criticism to make on not only all the Star Wars Disney Plus shows, but all the Disney Plus made shows that include Marvel. Disney Plus shows are the equivalent to a seltzer drink. It's mostly fuzz, but once in a while you get hints of flavor and liquor. These shows are paced like hell. They're 2-hour-long movies stretched out to be shows. While in this show, each episode feels like it has a point, you could easily edit out hours of screen time and still have the same story. As these shows go on, you'll notice it more and more, trust me. And this would not be an issue if all the episodes were all out at once. Of all the shit I give to the Marvel Netflix shows, I can concede that at least it's all there to watch. Bam, bam, bam. You can binge it. But these Disney shows, 1 a week. Maybe 2 or 3 if it's the premiere. I would argue that this is a predatory tactic by the powers that be, to suck in as much monthly subscription revenue as possible. I would say that this needs to change ASAP, but given how the industry will probably be rocked by the writer strikes, I say something is going to give and change its whole system. Or at least I hope so. Oh, and hope for fair pay too, at least for the good writers anyway. The good news is that The Mandalorian Seasons 1 and 2 are pretty episodic, which counters the pacing issues a little bit. It feels like Mando has a different problem or job or planet to visit each episode. In this show, we go to a bunch of places, like Navarro, Tatooine, and even a New Republic prisoner ship. This is the first time we actually see any bit or mention of the New Republic in its prime, knowing that it will eventually fail. But the sets for the new planets aren't awful when you consider the likely reduced budget these shows have compared to the movies. They knew how much to shoot to get the point of the scenery across. And like with the rest of Disney stuff, the places feel dirty and worn down. I feel like if you were to scrape your leg on some of these sets, you'll get tetanus. And we get introduced to a bunch of new characters. Surprisingly, a good amount of them I found enjoyable to watch. Din Djarin, Greef Karga, Mayfield, Fennec Shand, Cara Dune, cancelled or not, she's great to watch and look at. Queel, IG-11, Moff Gideon. God, that's such a badass name. And even the crew that Mando works with in Chapter 6 is a lot of fun. Aside from the general problems I have with these shows that I mentioned earlier, there are 2 episodes I found really weak. Chapters 4 and 5, both of which ironically had 2 of the better directors for the show, Dave Filoni and Bryce Dallas Howard. 4, or Sanctuary, is actually a good story. The heroes have to teach a village on a backwater planet how to defend itself from raiders, reminiscent of older samurai movies. It's just that the Clone Wars Season 2 did this a lot better and in less time. The same exact premise. That's my main gripe there. It's just the same thing. Same show, same episode. Nothing different except for the different characters. Chapter 5, The Gunslinger, is the Tatooine episode. Because no matter how far away it is from everything else, Mos Eisley will always be the center for all criminals ever in the galaxy. Mos Eisley looks deserted. Probably due to the budget, but it just looks wrong, you know? And the guy that Mando has to help to get Fennec, well, to reference a Chris Stuckman review, his acting would fit right in with the prequels. I will say that my favorite moment in this season was in Chapter 3, when, after giving Baby Yoda to the client, and he feels shitty about it, there's a moment when Mando is about to take off in the Razor Crest, when he notices that the ball end of the lever to take off is gone, because Baby Yoda was playing with it. That last realization of guilt and sadness changes his mind, and he goes back. It's a small moment, but it's long enough. Sometimes, and I mean sometimes, the slower pacing can work for these shows, especially if it's to convey emotion. And the scene was all done in silence, like he didn't say, I miss Baby Yoda, ooh. He says nothing and just lets the scene play out. Overall, I think the average person will enjoy this show. Mandalorian was definitely made to suck in casual fans, and it worked. I like the show fine. I just wouldn't say it's truly special. It is cool to see a live-action Star Wars show finally come to be. I know that there were attempts years before to make one, and now there is a solid foundation. But past that, I would maybe say the show is slightly overrated. But let's be honest, Star Wars itself is overrated, and that's okay. Some parts of Mandalorian are really cool, like anything with Moff Gideon, and when the characters are discussing the big picture of the galaxy. I'd say give it a watch, but like with Force Awakens, you probably already did. Last thing I will say, Jon Favreau is a hell of a producer. With some exceptions, most of his projects he works on are so much better than they ought to be. Iron Man, Elf, and now Mandalorian. I know everyone and their mother wants Filoni to be the head director person thing at Lucasfilm, but they should keep Favreau close by, maybe produce like the head producer. I mean, that man has a talent that not enough people praise, I think. So when I started the series, I meant for it to be each part had its own video, not multiple parts in one video. But with time constraints and just me having a lot on my plate in life, I decided to forego the fun editing and merge all the reviews into 3 parts. What was not intentional, however, was that the first part would be a generally good beginning for Disney. This part was to encapsulate the shitty parts of their content, and the third part was to have a shiny, gleaming bits of hope in it. If I were pretentious, I'd say that this was on purpose, to mimic the story of the original trilogy. But I am just making that connection now, so oops. But yes, ladies and gentlemen, the last thing I'm going to cover in this video is Star Wars Episode 9, The Rise of Skywalker, my least liked Star Wars film. This doesn't even feel like a film. This feels like 3 or 4 ideas for a movie crammed into one, and a failure in writing and editing, and a colossal failure in storytelling that in no way feels like the end of all Star Wars. So strap in, folks. It's going to be a long one, and here we go. Before I tear this movie apart limb from limb in no resemblance of any order, there are 2 aspects of the movie that prevent it from being a 0 out of 10. And that's Kylo Ren and old Sheev Palpatine himself. While I find the idea of Palps coming back abhorrent in every way, Ian McDiarmid, man, that guy knows how to blend cheesiness and just plain evil really well. Now, I won't shit on the acting ability of anyone in this movie, as I truly believe they were all directed for shit. But Adam Driver's performance seems the least harmed. His emotions feel real, and when he goes to help Rey in the end, and fights the Knights of Ren, the little shrugs he does are so subtle yet so charming, like you actually believe he's Leia's and Han's kid. Every actor in this movie deserves so much better. Better lines, better stories, better writing, directing, you name it. Rey, while she does have an arc, feels so by the numbers. If we were to go by what we learned in Last Jedi, her being born from nobody special is such a nice change of pace. She doesn't need to be Palp's granddaughter, or Palp's clone's daughter. Okay, let me get this part of the way too. There are essential bits of information missing from this movie that is in the novelization. Not lore, not little tidbits or little moments, essential information for the story. Like how the Palpatine we see in this movie is actually a clone, and not the real guy we saw falling in the Death Star. That's storytelling 101. You don't require external sources to complete your story. But yeah, Rey being a Palpatine means that she has to deal with darkness. But it's so, again, by the numbers, even worse so than in Harry Potter, because Rey only accidentally acts in anger. We should see her be enraged, maybe even slaughtering First Order stormtroopers, then taking a step back in remorse. Accidentally shooting lightning and fake killing Chewbacca feels like the writers are saying, see? Technically she used lightning and that's a bad guy thing. But it's not interesting. Oh, and poor Chewbacca. Like, here's some contrast for you. In the older Legends continuity, that doesn't count anymore, Chewie is the only one of the original main characters to die. He sacrifices himself to save one of Han's kids during the Yuuzhan Vong War. And yeah, Han is devastated by this, but man, Chewie went out like a hero. Luke, Leia, Han all got to grow old and have families. I guess Luke's would get killed anyway, but whatever. In the actual timeline, Chewie is all alone now. Han got killed by his son. Luke force exerted himself too much and died. And now Leia sacrifices herself to save her son during a duel with Rey. So does that mean that Rey killed her? I don't know, but all Chewbacca now has is 3PO, R2, and Lando. And about Leia, I get that Disney was in a tight spot with her. I heard somewhere, someplace, that Carrie Fisher stated that she gave consent for them to use her footage for this one after she goes. But given how she died, I don't know if I believe that. Her scenes are, and I'm just being honest, awkwardly shot. They probably only had those 2 shot reverse shots to use with that specific dialogue, but when other characters are talking to her, the dialogue just, it feels like it has to fit specifically with what they had, especially that scene with Snap Wesley. This may be nitpicking, I don't know, but when I watch these scenes, I don't see characters talking. I see a mad dash in the editing room for all this to make sense. I'm assuming Disney learned from this, and that's why in the second Black Panther movie, you don't even see T'Challa. Everyone's just reacting to him dying. But what else can I say? Finn's a wasted character. Whatever modicum of intrigue Poe had is lost. And that whole Finn had to tell Rey something and doesn't, either finish the plotline or don't have it. I don't care if it was confirmed by other people what he was trying to say. Have it in the movie or don't. Oh, and the disrespect they showed to my boy 3PO, and the lame-ass Marvel humor in this. When 3PO says he wants one last look at my friends, I'm like, dude, these ain't your friends. All they've done is talk shit. You had a better friendship and better chemistry with Jar Jar Binks, for Christ's sake. If there's one thing I hate in franchises, it's the course correction. An example of this is when Rey tosses her lightsaber away on Ahch-To, only for Ghost Luke to catch it, countering what he said in the last picture. It's so obvious and lazy. Oh, sure. Sometimes course corrections can be done right. One of my favorite movies ever is X-Men Days of Future Past. But here's what makes it a good movie. 1. The story is actually great. 2. The correction part is a consequence of the movie's actions and not the main goal, as their goal was just to prevent a bad future. And while unintentional, that movie actually feels like an ending. Like you could watch that and have that be your last X-Men movie. No Deadpool, no Logan, no New Mutants. This movie feels like a bunch of old, witless executives were just sitting around the table going, we didn't really plan out this franchise like we did with the MCU. What are some easy things we can do that fans might like so we can finish this off? Let's say we do all of them and forego the story. And this movie does not feel like the finale to Star Wars. I mean, sure, it loosely, and I mean loosely, ties it into the prequels, but it focuses more on undoing Last Jedi than having the big last fight with the First Order. Palpatine coming back is such a disservice to the movies as a whole. Look, my favorite moment of the original trilogy, maybe the whole saga, is in Episode 6, when Vader, silently, decides to save his son and redeem himself by taking out the Emperor and thus sacrificing his life for redemption. That moment with just the movie as context alone works great, but it's actually amplified by the existence of the prequel movies and the Clone Wars show. Bringing the Emperor back negates that sacrifice, and all for spectacle because nothing creative or original was done with this redo of Palpatine. Now listen, I could go on and keep listing things I dislike about The Rise of Skywalker, but let this serve as why I think this is the worst movie in the entire Star Wars franchise. So on May 4th this year, my soon-to-be wife and I decided to use one of those random chance spinning wheel things online to pick a Star Wars film to watch. And it picked this one. It was the second time I've ever seen this movie, and it was a slog fest. I found myself with way more positive things to say about The Last Jedi and Solo. After this movie ended, we decided, fuck it, let's watch The Phantom Menace. And as we watched it, we found ourselves with more nice things to say about that picture than Rise of Skywalker. Like, this is a shot on film. It makes all the colors look organic. And stilted acting aside, there are some decent lines in this one. And Qui-Gon is kind of a cool character. And that poor Jake Lloyd kid, man. And of course, man, that Watto guy is a real bastard. I know some people like that. Greedy son of a bitch. And then the next day we popped in Attack of the Clones, and by a much slimmer margin, the same thing happened. Those two movies are shit by any normal person's standards. I admit I have a bias for the prequels, but come on, those movies have more holes in them than someone in a firing line. And yet, there was somewhat passion in them. Lucas wanted to tell a story about the death of a republic and the Jedi who protected it. I would rather have a movie spearheaded by one man or woman's ideas than this focus group overbloated, poorly planned, and even more poorly written slop. I think The Room is unironically a better movie than this. I truly and sincerely hope, however, that all the actors and set designers and costume people, that all those guys who did not control this project, I wish for them all the success in the world and a brighter career in the future. Godspeed. That concludes my thoughts on the movie that we got. Now, if you'll pardon me, I would like to divulge what I would have done differently with this trilogy had I been in control of it, and also how I think that these movies will possibly be fondly remembered. Now listen, I believe that real writers need to stay away from what fans want. Fan-made ideas are the lowest common denominator of storytelling, and I will die on that hill. What I'm proposing is just pie-in-the-sky ideas. Please, for the love of God, do not use them. They're just for funsies. To start off small, I think bringing back the Emperor / Darth Sidious / Sheev Palpatine / Apprentice of Plagueis could have worked with a much different approach. What if Palpatine was just a presence and not a physical entity? What if the main goal of the movie was to prevent him from coming back at all, assuming his soul was too angry or too powerful to die completely? Here's what I mean. In the fourth Harry Potter book / movie, Voldemort was just a lingering presence, but his presence was interacting with the events in the story, which made the mood and the tone of the book and movie darker and scarier. So that when he does get a corporeal body, it's presented as this horrible event that changes the game for the heroes. How if Palpatine do like half of that? The galaxy could be in grave danger if this bastard returns. The Resistance would know that if he comes back, all the sacrifices from the Galactic Civil War would be for nothing. So this is the largest threat they could imagine. Him already being back in the movie kind of negates that threat, because he's already there, just working in the shadows doing fuck all. Plus, you could still have the scene when Kylo Ren talks to a ghost and becomes a good guy. But instead of Han Solo, make it his grandpa, Anakin Skywalker. Kylo Ren has been emulating him as Darth Vader. Maybe he needs to understand why Anakin had to turn back. In turn, Kylo Ren gets no closure for killing Han Solo, and the story is more for it. Like, sorry guy, you killed your dad. Live with it and accept the consequences. But move on and learn so you can avoid that pain in the future, if that makes any sense. Okay, but now for the big change, and this is trilogy-wide. Keep Force Awakens as is, but in Last Jedi, there needs to be a new threat outside of the First Order. A threat that is far more dangerous and powerful, that threatens the existence of these characters in a bigger way. Maybe Snoke is from another galaxy or another dimension, and he's secretly setting up the First Order to just weaken the galaxy, like how Palpatine did with the galaxy during the Clone Wars. Yes, I know that this premise is very similar to the Yuuzhan Vong, but it doesn't have to be them word for word. It just needs to be an outside and existential threat. Have Last Jedi end with, I don't know, Luke sacrificing himself to save people. The last true Jedi. Maybe Rey could be a newer version or form of what a Jedi should be, so that the story can change and evolve. Have the threat be so massive that in The Rise of Skywalker, or whatever it would be called, the First Order and the New Republic team up to defeat the bad guys. And of course have your fan service, incorporate places and characters from the OG and prequel movies, yada yada yada. That, in my humble opinion, would be 100% more climactic than what we have. And that could be the end point of the timeline. No shows, books, anything after that. Let the story evolve, then end. That's maybe how I would do it. But it's not what reality is. Reality is The Force Awakens, The Last Jedi, and The Rise of Skywalker. And no alternate timeline will appear. No multiverse, no Legends come back. This is it. So how will it be remembered? I don't know. I don't think anyone can know. But I have an idea. I think these movies, in 10 to 20 years' time, will be remembered fondly and be nostalgic for those who saw this at a younger age, before they get all cynical and just enjoy them for what they are. If the prequels, objectionably shitty movies, can be fondly remembered, then so can these three films. And I hope so. I hope someone like Dave Filoni can interpret the story of the sequels as this grand, if not imperfect tale, like how he did with the prequels. I hope this trilogy gets a Clone Wars-esque show that legitimizes it. I hope a new wave of fans hold these movies as dearly as my generation did to the prequels, and the older crowd to the originals. I mean, as fun as it is to roast movies, it's even better when someone is genuinely touched by a movie. And I'm not talking about coom-soomers from Reddit. I'm talking about like real stuff in a legit way. I mean, parts of Revenge of the Sith does do that for me, and I only hope someone gets that from these presently hated movies. Alrighty guys, now we are at the end. And perhaps you've noticed that there are a few things I have not covered on this retrospective, because I just have not had the time or interest to watch. Luckily, it's not a lot of things. I have not watched Resistance or Visions, and I guess I won't watch all of Forces of Destiny. I don't think one needs to watch all that tertiary stuff to get the scope of Star Wars and its expanded universe. Plus, two of those things are meant for a younger audience, so it ain't for me. To be frank, I'll probably check out Visions. My one friend told me that Visions is apparently really good, especially if you like the old anime. I don't care for anime, but I don't hate it, and I can appreciate the animation and the artwork here. I'll probably watch those 2 seasons before I look at Resistance. I don't know, man, this show looks kinda whack to me. The premise and the animation don't really hook me. It's about a rando kid who gets pulled in by the Resistance to be a spy. The animation is that shitty, cel-shaded stuff that I don't like. Rebels, for all of its flaws, at least looks somewhat alive. This show looks like Skyland from Nickelodeon in the mid-2000s. Does anyone remember that show? From what I saw, it was actually kind of decent. But while we are on the topic of me disappointing you all on what I won't cover, I plan on stopping the retrospective after Ahsoka. It was originally going to be Mandalorian Season 3, but I think I have something worthwhile to say about Ahsoka when it's over. I plan on coming back at some point, but after some time. I need the newer stuff to stew for a bit, to sit with me so I can form a good opinion. So I won't be covering Jedi Survivor for a bit. I actually just got the game on sale, but I actually need to play that bad boy. And on the topic of games, I won't do LEGO Skywalker Saga. It's just the 9 movies plus DLC of the spin-off stuff. Nothing new to discuss with you guys. Plus, if I'm being honest, I don't care much for that game. I think it's a watered-down LEGO game that focuses on looking pretty versus capturing the feel of the movies. And more importantly, it ain't fun. It's a walking simulator. You seldom build things in the game. Like in the Phantom Menace part of the game, the first thing you actually build in the game was when you get the Gungans to help you out against the Trade Federation. Go play the complete saga. It's parsecs better than the Skywalker saga. Oh, and I won't do Squadrons either. Flying game, not my cup of tea. Sorry. But never mind that critical stuff. How about some hope? The new things coming out, if they even come out, look decent to me. However, the idea of there being a movie that's the culmination of all the New Republic shows is probably a bad one. It smells of Marvel influence. But my man Dave Filoni is directing it. And from what I'm seeing, they are making Heir to the Empire their Infinity War. I am interested, to say the least. The Dawn of the Jedi stuff intrigues me too. In Legends, we had a Dawn of the Jedi as well, but it was about the Jedi Order, and not about the origins of the Jedi themselves. So this may be better. Who knows? Then there's Rey's new Jedi Order movie. The sequel trilogy can't ever be saved. That's a fact. But the idea that The Rise of Skywalker won't be the last Star Wars piece on the timeline fills me with hope. I remember a time that people did like Rey. I only hope that this movie puts a better outlook on the sequel trilogy characters than the trilogy itself did. But yeah, that's all I have for this epilogue. Thank you for hearing me on this weird tangent of things to come and things that won't. But never say never. Maybe I'll cover Resistance and Visions someday. Tell you what, if I reach 1 million subscribers, I'll do it. 1 million, nothing less. Actually, I'll sell it for just 500. And that just about covers this part of the Disney Star Wars Retrospective. I'll have the last part out hopefully sooner than later, probably next week. That one will have more positive reviews in it, I hope. But until then, thank you for watching, and I'll see you later.